Hello everyone, I'm Jiahao from WizLogic, the host for today's WizConnect webinar. We are very honored to have Magali Bertin, the Director of Hekla Consulting with us today. Magali is an aerospace lead auditor. Today, we will have her to share with us on the benefits of AS standards and guidance during the pandemic. Without further ado, let's welcome Magali to start with her sharing today. Magali, please.
Thanks, Jahos. Thanks to WizLogic for inviting me to present this webinar. Good morning to everyone and welcome to people connected today. I hope this presentation will be beneficial to all of you. So the title today is Benefits of AS Standards, mostly AS 9100 series standards and guidance during the pandemic. So what are we going to discuss today? So first, I'm going to introduce myself a bit, my company called Hekla Consulting, and then we will discuss AS standards. So I'm going to explain what are these AS 9100 series standards, who writes these standards, then how to implement them, and lastly, how these audits for AS standards are being done right now during the pandemic. So I'm Magali. I'm an aerospace lead auditor. I'm French, as you can hear. I've been in Singapore for 15 years. In the past, I was a project manager in the aerospace industry in France, in space industry, aircraft building industry, and defense. I used to work for EADS, Honeywell, Safran, and Dassault Aviation. And so for the past 12 years, I've been in aerospace quality management. So this is my LinkedIn profile if you want to know more about me. And if you scan the QR code there, you have all my details. In 2008, I have incorporated this company called Hekla Consulting. So it's a one-person company, so just me. On the slide here, you can see what are my activities. So first, audits, internal audits, third-party audits, supplier audits for 9100, 9110, 9120, as well as Part 145. Trainings for the same standards, plus ATS Spec 300, which is the standard for packaging for aerospace. I also provide consulting services, same standards, as well as ISO 17025 for calibration laboratories, because I'm also lead auditor for that standard. And lastly, quality management outsourcing. This is more for SMEs. If you don't have enough resources in-house, then I can be your support quality manager. So these are the activities that I do. On the left-hand side here, you have the QR code, and it will link you to my website. Just an overview of my clients. They are in alphabetical order, so there is no advertisement here. You can see WizLogic is my clients as well, so you can also, for them, I can do advertisements, so you can see them if you need. So the previous one were aerospace companies. My second category of clients are certification bodies. I conduct audits on their behalf. So these are my past and current clients. And I used to be, for many years, I was an instructor at the Singapore Space Academy. I was teaching space engineering there. Unfortunately, it's finished. So that's it for myself and my companies. What are these aerospace standards? So these aerospace standards, actually there are many, but what we are going to discuss is this AS 9100 series of standards. So these are standards that are developed by the aerospace industry for the aerospace industry. They are all based on ISO 9001. Why do I say they are developed by the aerospace industry? Is actually that in many aerospace companies, these aerospace companies send a representative to this body called International Aerospace Quality Group. And this group is in charge of writing the standards. So they will write what are the basic requirements they would like for their own suppliers. As an aerospace company, what do I want? What is the minimum I want from my suppliers? So of course you have the biggest companies who are members of this group, like Airbus, Boeing, and you have subgroups, one in America, AAQG, one in Europe, EAQG, one in Asia Pac, APAQG, and there is also a group in Singapore, which is called Singapore Aerospace Quality Group. So there are a certain number of members in each group. I think in Asia Pac, the number has increased since I got that slide. So I think we are nearer to 20 now. Another point I mentioned is that these standards are based on ISO. In case you are not familiar with ISO, this is what it is. ISO describes the minimum requirements an organization needs to have in place for a quality management system. Another question is, what is a quality management system? A quality management system is actually whatever you have in your company, the structure, who is responsible for what, processes, procedures, capabilities, activities, and resources. And our objective is to satisfy our clients, so to ensure our product and services satisfy the client and satisfy the regulatory and statutory requirement, especially in aerospace environment. I mentioned it's AS9100 series, meaning there are actually 3 standards in this series: AS9100, 9110, and 9120. Something I want to highlight is that you may see other names for these standards. You may see EN 9100 or GISQ 9100. It's actually the names given in other regions. AS is mostly used in US, EN is Europe, GISQ is Japan. So, but the content of the standard is exactly the same in every region. It's just the language that may change, but otherwise, even the name is different, it's the same content. So IS 9100 is for aviation, space, and defense organizations, but actually it's a bit wide, the name, but it's meant for companies who do design and production. It's also meant for companies who provide maintenance services for their own products or distribution services for their own product. The moment a company provides maintenance services for products that they didn't design or produce themselves, the standard is AS9110 for MROs. And for distribution, it's AS9120. So you see the title is Aviation, Space, and Defense Distributors, but it's also applicable for logistics companies like freight forwarders and for trading. Something that I didn't mention is that these standards, these schemes are voluntary. So it's not like Part 145 or Part 21, which are regulatory requirements. These are voluntary schemes, just like ISO 9001. It becomes a bit less voluntary when your client is asking for it. The client may say, okay, I buy from you only if you are certified to AS. They are based on ISO, as you can see here, and there are many additional requirements that IAQG defined. And these additional requirements are related to various topics. So they could be related to operational risk management, product safety, configuration management. There is a huge emphasis on time delivery, product conformity. Also, there are requirements about the management and prevention of counterfeit parts, suspected and approved parts, FOD, foreign object damage. This is very important in the aerospace industry. And there are lots of requirements that comes in addition to ISO related to production, to the management of external provider, how you qualify your suppliers, etc. So there is a big variety of additional requirements. And if I go back to my previous slide, you see there are different standards. So some additional requirements are common to all three, but there will be specific requirements for MROs, specific requirements for distributors that you won't find in AS 9100. The structure that you see here is these are the paragraphs that you will find in these standards. They are the same paragraph as in ISO. The three standards follow the ISO structure, which is called the high-level structure. You will find this structure also in ISO 14001, 45001, 50001, and also in the automotive standard TS 16949. It follows the PDCA cycle, Plan, Do, Check, Act. So the standard will explain what are the requirements for defining what is the context of your company, what are the interactions with different bodies, different companies around your own company. Also defines the management responsibility, as well as the planning, the objectives, how you set your KPIs, how you plan for changes, and also it's asking you to define the risks and the opportunities for your company. So we are defining what is the context, and still for planning, we will the standard will require you to define your support activities. So what are your resources, the people, the infrastructure? Are people competent and trained? Are they aware of the documentation? Are they aware of their own objectives? Also, the standard asks you about to define how is the communication done internally and externally, as well as how you document the information, how you keep your records, etc. So that's all the planning. So the standard makes sure that you are ready to deliver your product or your service. Then there are requirements about how you perform your core process, how you do your core activity. So there is a part about planning, a part about how your company evaluates the customer requirements, analyzes the customer requirements. There is a paragraph about design if you have design, but sometimes it could be excluded if you don't do design. There are also requirements about how you manage your external providers, what kind of information you provide to them, and of course requirements about how you perform your process, how you record the different steps, what checks you do, etc. The release of your products also, as well as the control of non-conforming products. What I didn't mention also in support is the calibration, of course, of the tools that you use during your do. Once you have done your main core activity, once you have performed your maintenance, when you have distributed your product or produced or designed your product, then you need to check if you did well. So this is what is defined in the check paragraph. So what do you need to do? What do you need to analyze? How you need to analyze? Also defining the internal audits, how you need to do to perform that, and the management review. Usually at the end of the year or twice a year, you will review everything in your quality management system and verify that everything went according to plan. And based on that conclusion, you will decide if you have some actions to take, if you need to consider more risks, and this will lead you to the action. So checking if you did good, then act to make sure you fix the issue and ensure it doesn't happen again. So that's the non-conformity and corrective action. Or the continual improvement. So even if everything went right, what can you do to make sure your system is going to improve constantly and continuously. This is one of the big emphasis of ISO and AS, is the continual improvement on top of customer focus, which is one of the other main point. Also, product safety is a very big focus in this standard. So this is how the standard is organized. Now, I understand many of you are already certified to AS 9100, but some of you today are not. So why would that be that it would be a good idea to register to AS 9100, 9110 or 9120? This is the meaning of 91XX here. And why now during this pandemic? The standards combine various requirements. As I said, ISO, customer requirements, also aviation authorities, defense departments, space organizations. So it means if you comply to AS, you comply to the basic requirements a client, an aerospace client, will like to see. So what are the advantages of registering? It's giving you more credibility with regard to your aerospace customers. If you are not in the aerospace yet, it's an entry to market tool, because in front of your clients, if you have never worked with aerospace product before, they may not be so confident, but the moment you tell them, yeah, I got that certification, I have this aerospace standard certification, it will give them the confidence that you are able to meet their basic requirements. It reduces costs and disruptions caused by second and third party audits. Why? Because if you don't have any certification, no ISO, no AS, then every client will need to come to your company and audit you fully for your all your QMS to check every single requirement. The moment you have AS, they will come, but they will just audit the delta, just the difference between the AS and their own requirements. So they may come less often, or when they come shorter time, which is less disruptive, especially if you have lots of customers. You fulfill the mandatory requirement, I mentioned that as well. Continual improvement, this is really the recurrent topic in the standard. Learning from the mistakes, making sure all your actions are effective, your trainings are effective. So it's pushing you, it's driving you in that continual improvement momentum. A last point is that the moment you are AS certified, you are registered in this database called Oasis. I'm going to speak about it a bit later. There are a few more topics, few more reasons why it's a good thing to register, is that on top of asking the companies to have high-level KPIs and monitor on time delivery and monitor product conformity, the standard is asking you to monitor the performance of each of your individual core processes. Like, what is the performance of your sales process? Not speaking about money, but speaking about effectiveness of that process, effectiveness of purchasing, effectiveness of design process, production, MRO. What is the individual effectiveness of this process? How do they contribute to the overall effectiveness of the company? So it's very interesting to know individually, because then you know where you need to improve. Doing all this, focusing on these two items will for sure ensure you increase the quality of your product and services, and the consequence when you have a good product or good service is that the clients are satisfied and they come back. So ultimately, it's necessarily a good thing. I come back to this Oasis database that I was talking about. So there is this website that you can visit. It's free, of course, and then everybody can register to consult the database. So what do we find in this database? We find the list of accreditation bodies. So these are the people who are above the certification bodies. And so we find a list of certification bodies. You find a list of auditors. So you can find me there because I'm a registered aerospace auditor. And most important for you is that we find this certified suppliers directory. When a company wants to purchase a service or a product, they may look into that directory, search for Singapore, for example, and see who is certified. And they may choose among that list because they may not want to bother buying from a company that has no certification yet, etc. So it's very good to be listed in this database for the confidence of your clients. At the moment, there are 228 companies certified to AS 91, 100, 10, and 20 in Singapore. That's a lot. For example, for 9120, now there are 68 companies certified. 12 years ago, there was none. So it's a huge increase. The aerospace industry in Singapore has increased a lot their certification rate here. Okay, so why would that be an advantage to implement this standard during the COVID? Less workload, more time to implement. It's by experience, many companies implement that standard. They have a big workload, lots of projects. So everything goes first before before the implementation. So the project is slowed down by other clients' requests, etc. So while you have less work, it's a good time to slowly implement and get used to the standard and to these new QMS requirements. It's also good to prepare for the restart of the aerospace industry economy. With the vaccine coming up, we can start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We all know that it's going to take years to come back to the level we were at the beginning of the year. But hopefully in the next few months, we will see an economic restart for the aerospace. So if you want to be ready, that's one way that you can take is start implementing that standard and get certified. The consequence of being certified, it's going to be that you may attract new clients if you are not in the aerospace industry yet, and then increase your sales again. Besides, even if you don't have aerospace products yet, it may be useful also for non-aerospace related jobs to improve your processes and improve your product quality. Something that I didn't mention also is it's possible to implement the standard and not getting certified immediately. I have clients who implement that standard and wait until a client is asking for it. So they have everything in place, they do their continual improvement, but they get the certification from the certification body only once the client is asking for it. Okay, so this is the end of our first part. So let's move on to the next part, which is about the implementation. So what do we need for this implementation? Basically, comply with all the requirements, especially the aerospace ones, comply with customer requirements, comply with regulatory requirements. In an aerospace audit, the auditor can write nonconformities against the standards, AS 9100, 10, and 20, but also against requirements from the clients, requirements from the authorities. For example, if the client has a requirement about a certain type of packaging, and you don't do it, you use a different, they ask a wooden box and you provide them with a carton box, and the auditor sees that, the auditor can raise a nonconformity. Or if you don't follow a requirement from the aviation authorities and the auditor sees that, also he or she can raise a nonconformity. Another point is that you need to make sure your processes are well implemented, monitored, and effective. That's the basics for your implementation. Now, some success points. The management has to be committed to the implementation, because if the management doesn't show they're interested in this implementation, the staff are not going to follow. It's important as well to understand those aerospace specific requirements well. So choose your training wisely, go to a good training to make sure you understand the intent so that you are able to implement the requirements properly. It's important as well to make sure that the entire company has a good focus on the customer, on the regulatory requirements, on the continual improvement, and having the control over the processes I mentioned as well. So the staff commitment will come directly from the management commitment. So these are the success points. The journey may start by getting a funding from Enterprise Singapore. Not everyone is eligible, so it may be an option. Implement and pass the audit. Enterprise Singapore, just a word about that. You have the website here. At the moment, if you're eligible, so one of the criteria is to have a 30% Singapore local ownership. If you comply with these requirements, then at the moment, if you apply before 31st of December and you've been affected badly by COVID-19, you may have a 90% support for the cost of implementation and certification. So I've seen some companies here, people in attendance have been very badly hit. So maybe that's an option for you to improve your process. The journey, it typically takes 6 to 12 months. It really depends on many parameters like the management commitment, the number of staff allocated to the project, if you are already ISO certified, if you already work with aerospace or not, if your processes are complex or not, if you have design or not. These are parameters that influence the duration of the project. The phases that are presented here are not always the same. It depends on the company or the consultant if you have one, but generally it works like that. At the beginning, we evaluate the level of the QMS, maybe do some kind of gap assessment, and we plan for the project. Then the second phase is to train people, brief them, making sure everyone in the company understands what we are doing, why we are doing it, what is the goal, what is the benefit for them as well. Next, we develop the system, we upgrade the documentation, make sure all the resources are available, like the infrastructure. For example, 9110, you need to segregate your serviceable and unserviceable parts. So do you have the infrastructure for that? And then lastly, we prepare before the certification. So we have a training for internal auditors. We don't do it too early because otherwise they forget when we conduct the first internal audit. So they perform the first internal audit. We fix the issue. We implement the corrective action if necessary. We conduct the management review. And then after, so that's the final preparation. And then after, you can go for your certification audit. The certification audit goes in two stages. One is more like a documentation review, and then it's the proper audit in the stage 2. So at the end of that audit, either you don't have any NCR. NCR stands for non-conformity report. And then straight after the audit report is submitted, you can get your certificate. Or you have major nonconformities, minor nonconformities. And in that case, you need to respond to the certification body, and then you get your certificate once you have responded. So that's how it works. The audit cycle, how does that work? At the beginning, you have stage 1 and stage 2. So this is what I was speaking about in certification audit. Stage 1, stage 2, they have to be not more than 3 months apart. Then you have 1 year between the stage 2 and surveillance 1 year for surveillance 2, and 1 year after recertification, and again surveillance 1, and it's the cycle is like this. It's a 3-year cycle. So for this implementation, you may ask yourself a few questions. So if you don't work in aerospace industry yet, how do you do? So you will need to use a product that maybe is not meant to be sold to an aerospace client, but you will process that product as if it was an aerospace product, with complying with all the requirements of the AS. Another question is, we don't have any order yet, or maybe the company is newly set up, or the product you want to process is a product line that you have never used before. You will need to use a dummy part. So either you get it from a client, or you manage to have a sample, and then you will process that part, and then the auditor will be able to assess your process. Okay, so that's the end of our part 2. So we are coming to the part that may interest more people who are already certified. So what happens during the pandemic? So there's IAQG has issued a notice called Management of Extraordinary Events or Circumstances in last November. So they've been issuing these notices in the past 6-7 months. So how does it work? Now, the initial audit, so if you have just implemented your system, so that's interesting for people who are not certified. Initial audits, stage 1 and stage 2, and special audits, which are the audits to add new sites. They can be done 100% remotely. So that's if there is no, in the certification body you have chosen doesn't have an auditor in Singapore, then the audit can be done 100% remotely. But there are conditions. The video is required, so you must be able to video any place in your company. you need to fulfill the eligibility. There is a list of requirements, and there must be a justification. So the IAQG has provided an evaluation form, and you can see in the eligibility criteria, they are asking if there are travel restrictions or governmental restriction or other restrictions. So all this has to be declared, and there are some risk analysis conducted by the certification body. For recertification and surveillance audit, it's also authorized to have 100% remote audit. The video is recommended but not mandatory, so it's very useful for companies who have export controls, for example, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to recertify them because they cannot have video in operation, in production or maintenance. But also there must be also a good justification, and the eligibility is assessed by the certification body. For transfer audit, meaning you change from one certification body to another, it's possible remotely, but it's not recommended during COVID-19. So there are companies who do that. I have done that a few times this year, but it's not recommended if you want to wait until the pandemic is finished. But we never know when it's going to be finished. So that's the statement from IAQG. It's not recommended. Another question that you may have is if you have your audit, but because of the pandemic and some restriction, your staff cannot come and you cannot close the nonconformities in time. So actually, I'm speaking about that slide. Actually, if you cannot close your nonconformities in time, then you may request an extra 90 days to close these nonconformities. It's applicable only for minor nonconformities and major nonconformities for the corrective action, but for the containment for majors, which is the timeline is 7 days usually, it's not applicable. You don't have any extension for that, only for responding to the corrective action for minors and corrective action for majors. The previous slides I was showing is what happens in case the certificate is expiring, but you don't have your audit because your auditor cannot come. In that case, the certificate will expire, but they will show a specific number on it, and it will show that the reason is because of COVID. And then you'll be able to reinstate your certificate within 12 months. So that's for renewal, but for surveillance, the certificate is not suspended if you have missed your audit date. So you have some time to do your audit. You can postpone your audit without the certificate to be suspended. So this one we've seen. And the last question you may have is, are there aerospace auditors in Singapore? Of course, there are aerospace auditors. I'm one, and there are many others. So you may be able to have your audit not remotely, but in person, if your company allows visitors. So we are almost at the end of this presentation. So if you have queries after this webinar, you can ask me questions. So on the left-hand side, if you scan, it's the same QR code as at the beginning of the webinar. You can get my contact details here, and on the right hand side is my website, so you can ask me questions after that, and if you want to contact me. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Magali, for your mind-blowing and very lively sharing today. I'm sure the audience who have come today will gain more knowledge on the benefits of AS standards and guidance during the pandemic. Magali, do you have any last words for the audience that spent with us this wonderful morning?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your attention. Wish you a pleasant day, and of course, Merry Christmas, and hopefully a very, very good year 2021.
Okay, thank you y'all for watching. Do allow me to share a bit more about WizLogic. WizLogic being in the business for PCB layout design, fabrication, component kitting, and assembly services for the past 20 years. If you are interested to know more about us, feel free to visit WizLogic websites, Facebook, and LinkedIn pages to know more of our full services and our upcoming course calendar. Thank you all for your time. Hope to see you next time. Take care, goodbye, and have a great day ahead.